West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In the end, it was done in the basement. Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Wyoming, purged from Republican leadership this morning, just after 9 a.m., for the unforgivable sin of refusing to lie about the last Republican president's attempts to destroy America's tradition of peaceful transfer of power. It was done in the basement in the most cowardly way imaginable, with a voice vote. They did a voice vote because they were afraid of their votes being on the record. And they did not do a secret ballot because they were afraid they might not win the vote. So now there is no written record of how the Republican members of the House voted. It was not in public, but as I mentioned, in the auditorium of the Capitol basement, and it was done in 20 minutes or so. New York Times reporting that some members missed the vote because they were arriving to the meeting when it broke up. It all happened so quickly. Now, Congresswoman Liz Cheney has placed herself now outside the Trump movement that has enveloped the Republican Party. Although, remember, the main way she has set herself outside of the movement is just by continuing to say the simple truth that much of the party agreed upon in the hours after the violent mob stormed the Capitol, chanting "Hang Mike Pence" and trying to install the loser of the election over the winner against the will of the American people.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term.
The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth.
God, but that's all in the past now. I mean, we're off that now. That was, what was that? I don't know, 10 years ago? 2 months, something. Everyone now bends the knee down in Mar-a-Lago. Republicans are focused on the future, which is taking back power however they can, by means democratic and not. And Congresswoman Liz Cheney is now an inconvenient roadblock to that goal. There was some gloating after the vote by some of the more MAGA-y members, including this truly classic and indeed inscrutable mission accomplished post from Congressman Matt Rosendale. That, of course, is the mission accomplished President George W. Bush banner, the one that he used when he announced the Iraq war was basically done, and it was like years and years from being done. Thousands of Americans lost their lives, tens of thousands of Iraqis after he appeared on that flight deck. In fact, when he tweeted that, I spent a full 15 minutes wondering, does he know what happened here? Why would he use that image? Is this a Iraq war thing about the Cheneys and the neoconservatives? Anyway, The question becomes, what now? Line has been drawn about what will and will not be tolerated in this Republican Party in the year of our Lord 2021. Remember, the Republican Party constitutes exactly 1/2 of the viable American political coalitions, 1/2 in our democracy, and this is the decision they have made about who will lead them and who will not. Now, there are people within the Republican coalition, I think, lobbyists and staffers and apparatchiks and elected members and voters who are aghast at what is happening. Congresswoman Cheney herself, but there's been a long line of others who have spoken out against Trumpism. Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, who voted to impeach Trump and stood by Liz Cheney and is still serving. There were Senators Jeff Flake and Bob Corker, both of whom decided to retire rather than serve in Trump's Republican Party. More than 100 Republicans, including some former elected officials, prominent ones you'd recognize, have threatened to form a third party. But here's the problem with all this, and it's just a very simple calculation about the viability of the Republican Party and preserving it and its connection to power over American life above all else, above principles or any other calculation. That's what's going on in the minds here. And the person who I have to say has come to articulate that most honestly and forthrightly is Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. I mean, Graham's politics, to the extent he has them, probably line up with Cheney in an ideological sense a lot more than he does with either Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York or Donald Trump. Graham is from the Cheney wing of the Republican Party, right? But he is very clear about his own calculation. He said this on Tuesday, quote, you got to read this to understand what's happening here. I think it would be a disaster for the Republican Party if we just didn't acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump's the most popular person in the party. If you tried to run him out of the party, he'd take half the party with him. I think Graham's right, right? They know that Trump could destroy them, their electoral viability, their proximity to power, and all that brings. And power is what they worship above all else, is what they are in pursuit of. In an exclusive interview with our own Savannah Guthrie today, Congresswoman Liz Cheney embraced her role as the leader of the new, this iteration of the anti-Trump opposition within the Republican Party.
Are you the leader of the opposition in exile right now in the Republican Party?
I intend to be the leader, one of the leaders in a fight to help to restore our party, in a fight to bring our party back to substance and principles, and in a fight to make clear that we won't participate in a really dangerous effort that's underway.
A lot of people frame this as a battle for the soul of the Republican Party.
This is I think, opening salvo in that battle. And it's a battle we have to win because it's not just about the Republican Party. It's about the country.
The Trump political team is actively looking to coalesce around a primary challenger to you. What is your message to them?
Bring it on.
Again, the bring it on thing, are we hearkening back to Bush on purpose here? Remember when he said that? The recent history of the Republican Party is not great. Anyway, the question for Liz Cheney, for Adam Kinzinger, for Jeff Flake, for all the never-Trumpers is, okay, so what are you willing to do about what you say is an existential threat to American democracy? The only thing that will get the attention of Republicans as a sort of collective, right, the party, the establishment that wants to stay in power, the only thing that gets attention will be credible threats to their political power, and credible threats to political power come via losing elections. We all know the score here, right? It's clear the base of the Republican Party voters are overwhelmingly on board with the anti-democratic Trump forces. But, on the other hand, political power in this country is determined by very small margins. As we saw in Georgia, where the entire control of the U.S. Senate turned on 2 narrow upset victories. It's the very same reason Republicans are pushing through all this voter suppression legislation at a state level. 30,000 votes here, 100,000 votes here. It all adds up. The margin in Georgia was 11,000 votes. The power the people in the Liz Cheney camp have is that slice, that margin. They clearly are not a majority of Republicans, but there is some slice of them. So then the question becomes, will they use that power to hurt the electoral prospects of Republicans who are rushing to undermine American democracy, to bring them to defeat? Because if they do not, then nothing will change.
It is Thursday, the 13th of May of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Well, today is my youngest sister's birthday. Happy birthday, sis. And I hope it's a good one. I know you're down there in Apple Valley in the heat. And I don't mean just meteorological heat. There's a lot of heat going on down there in Cali. I hated that term, Cali. It's California. Okay, come on. Anyway, it looks like this recall is turning out to be the joke we all thought it would be, except we thought the previous one against Gray Davis, no one remembers Gray Davis. Who? Yeah, he was the governor that got recalled, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger came in. And that was supposed to be a clown show, too, and look what happened. Not that, well, let's just say that Schwarzenegger might have moderated some of his politics a bit after the experience, or during the experience of leading the largest state in the country. I think it's the largest. Well, let's put it this way. The fifth economic powerhouse in the world. So, yeah, Gray Davis did nothing wrong except be the victim of an Enron scam to scam the energy market and make Grandma Millie freeze to death. And they blame Gray Davis for that, I guess, because if you can blame the victim after putting your knee on their throat, hey, the world is your oyster. And speaking of the world is your oyster, it looks like that pearl, Liz Cheney, has been expelled from the meaty mass inside the shell that they call MAGA. Yeah. See what I did there? Wow. I keep harping on this. I know. Hey, if Liz Cheney is the pinnacle of reason, the pinnacle defender of democracy, then you know how far into Nazism the Republican Party has fallen. Liz Cheney. Jeez. My God. You know, it's hard to tell these goose steppers apart sometimes, isn't it? Oh, yeah, that was a good one. They still like democracy, but they're goose stepping. I know, but it's, still within the confines of what we consider to be polite representative democracy. Thank you. Liz Cheney. Yeah, I have also been harping on we are in big trouble, and we better keep working. It's not a given that the midterms are going to be terrible for Joe Biden. The midterms usually are, and it's true, a referendum on the failures of the administration, legislatively and economically. And so far, Joe hasn't suffered any one or either of those tests, shall we say. Economy seems to be, yeah, I know the jobs report was a bit down, but but I wonder why. Is there a pandemic going on? And it looks like the economy is doing pretty darn good in spite of these ransomware attacks from Russian actors, a hostile foreign power. And it looks like his response to the pandemic has put his approval rating, 63% more? Maybe that's the 71% number, but his overall approval is 63%. Trump was lucky to break 40. Oh, I know he went to 48 one time. But I think that was when they only polled, that one diner in Pennsylvania. But they included the workers, and that was why, the other, 52 or what would it be? Yeah, 52% said, no, we don't like the guy. That being Trump. And so it looks like the media wants a horse race. Is there any such thing as a horse race when you're trying to beat Nazism? I don't like that. I don't like the metaphor of a horse race like that. Okay. we need to get to work, and every time we vote, it is punching a Nazi, maybe even 10. Maybe. What else has been going on besides Liz Cheney? Well, it looks like Marjorie Taylor Greene is, she's being described as a stalker. And I would say, yeah, she's an armed stalker. Has anybody actually checked to see if she has a gun? Or what if she did one of those 3D ceramic gun things? And was it, I think the firing pin would still pick up on the metal detector. Have they perfected? I don't think they can make a firing pin in any material other than metal. So maybe we'll be lucky. Yeah, maybe. So, she's being a thorn on people's sides, stalking AOC for, I don't know, attention, because they certainly don't know how to legislate. Of course, she's not on any committees right now, so she has a lot of free time to do what she's doing. Maybe they're getting ready to have another. Well, it would be a continuation of the insurrection that we are experiencing at this very moment. And why is that? Because they think it's a given that Joe is going to lose the House and we're going to lose seats in the Senate. And I would argue that is not the case, because that is why they're trying to prevent anybody from being able to vote. Even their own people. Their own people really like what Joe is doing, and they don't want them voting for Joe or his agenda. My God. Yeah, isn't it weird that get the brainwasher in chief out of the brainwashing business on a mass scale, and people are, I don't know, waking up from their stupor? Doesn't make him any less stupid, because there's a lot of people filling up gasoline in plastic bags as we speak. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? The Justice Department is looking at how to weed out extremists in law enforcement. I've been saying this for a long time. We need to purge all the Nazis out of law enforcement. How about government in general? That would be nice. The EPA announced a big push to clean up contaminated industrial sites, and it's about time. And the DHS will grant a Jones Act waiver request for Colonial Pipeline to ease the ransomware fuel supply bottlenecks between Gulf Coast and East Coast ports. Do not put gasoline in plastic bags, please. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Russia arrested a former mayor for organizing what they call an illegal rally over the Navalny jailing. And the Red Cross warned that coronavirus cases are exploding in Asia. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is our chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly, for doing so. If you would then look across the page near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will then notice that Patreon link. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could possibly afford the cost of what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, send those funds to us once a month. We are able to stretch those dollars on the quantum level. And because of that ability, which we have perfected after 10 years of resistance broadcasting, yes, 10 years this year, a full decade of Well, 24/7, 365 Resistance Broadcasting. We're the little powerhouse that could, and we are. Well, your contribution to us once a month allows us to pay our bills, which then we have found allows us to get away with so much. And we're able to fulfill our civic duty. Fancy that, as the founders originally intended, and we thank you for your generosity. Once again, all kidding aside, I want to give a shout out to folks who have new Patreons to Netroots Radio. Thank you. And also to those of you who have recently increased your monthly patronage. It does, again, come at a critical time because, you phase in these machines and the software, the attendant software needed. And so that's what we've been doing. We've got several machines here that have been chugging away. One's almost 6 years old. And so there's that. So thank you for your generosity. We intend to continue. It doesn't look like the Nazis are giving up. No, they are not. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. And thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. And then get that linked up on Twitter and other social media platforms. I'm looking at you, Zuckerberg, you. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, go to at CookbookWest and pick up podcasts. Please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. I did get a notice. I don't know if it was because of a personal device issue of folks who have mentioned this. There may be something going on with our iTunes feed, and we will have Tom look into that and make sure that everything's hunky-dory. So you can always go to our homepage at netrootsradio.com. There's a player right there, so you can listen to not only this show, but all the shows on Netroots Radio. Around the clock. We never stop. Never. All right, let's dive in. Let's tuck in. Yeah, that's the more appropriate culinary term. We're going to tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Oh, by the way, my recipe for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays is in the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's. So go to that link and check it out. All right. The Associated Press brings us this first offering here, and I picked it up by way of the American Independent. Fancy that. The Justice Department, not to be confused with my music show on Saturdays. They're really speaking about the Department of Justice, but a lot of people call it the Justice Department. That's why I've been cyber squatting on that, and they're going to pay. Someday they will. Anyway, the Justice Department has begun an internal review to determine how to remove any extremists from within federal law enforcement following the arrest of current and former police officers for their involvement in the January 6 attack on the Capitol, Attorney General Merrick Garland said. Garland, in response to a question during a Senate hearing on domestic extremism, described a review that was in its early stages and is complicated by the need to avoid violating the First Amendment rights of Justice Department employees. The Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, has met with the heads of all of our law enforcement agencies to determine how we can carefully vet our employees, he told the Senate Appropriations Committee. I gotta say, First Amendment rights, I couldn't get a job at the State Department back in the day in my mid-20s because my best friend and I organized the first Impeach Nixon rally west of the Rockies. And we also held it in Richard M. Nixon Park, which later has become the Nixon Library. And the park also encompassed the very house that his father built and Richard Nixon was born in Yorba Linda, not Whittier. He went to college at Whittier. He lived in Yorba Linda. Let's be clear about that. Anyway, because of that, I could not attain a security clearance. What about my First Amendment rights? What about that? Well, it was a notable disclosure considering the Justice Department is charged with enforcing federal civil rights laws and oversees the FBI, which is the lead agency in charge of investigating the growing threat posed by violent domestic extremists, which is just a nice way of saying the Nazis. We're not talking Antifa here. It was also potentially tricky legal ground because of the risk of intrusion on personal beliefs that are protected under the Constitution. So you're saying my belief in impeaching Nixon was violated because I actually acted upon it? Now, if these folks are willing to act upon an insurrection, wouldn't they be, shall we say, denied employment? Garland described those competing interests as being mindful of First Amendment free associational rights, but at the same time, being careful that we do not have people in our ranks who commit criminal acts or who are not able to carry out their duties. The Department of Homeland Security last month announced a similar review aimed at determining the extent of any presence of violent extremists within its ranks. Secretary Mayorkas, who also testified at Wednesday's hearing on the broader efforts by their agencies to address the growing threat from extremism, told the committee that the results of that analysis would be publicly released. The Attorney General's disclosure of an internal review came in response to a question from Illinois Senator Dick Durbin about the arrest of a retired New York Police Department officer Thomas Webster in the January 6 attack on the Capitol, in which supporters of Trump sought to force Congress to overturn the results of the November election. Webster, who was captured on video tackling a police officer and striking him with a metal flagpole, was charged with 6 counts. Durbin said Webster's arrest raises a painful question whether there are others in state, local, or federal law enforcement who might be capable of extremist behavior. And I would proffer the question, when has it ever not been? Garland suggested that federal grants could be issued to local and state police departments to help them vet potential officers. Also during the hearing, he described the broader Capitol investigation, with more than 400 arrests to date, as far from complete, as authorities comb through video and other evidence. At times during the hearing, Republicans sought to shift discussion to the increasing number of migrants apprehended at the southwest border, or press Garland on whether the Justice Department was improperly making the Capitol investigation a priority over other matters, including violence during last summer's social justice protests. Oh yes, go after Black Lives Matter. Go after Antifa. Why are you going after the people that Trump wanted the National Guard to protect? Why? Why? The Attorney General called the January 6 attack an attempt to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power, a fundamental element of our democracy, he said, and thus worthy of attention. I have not seen a more dangerous threat to democracy than the invasion of the Capitol, he emphasized. An Associated Press survey of law enforcement agencies nationwide found that at least 31 officers in 12 states are being scrutinized by their supervisors for their behavior in Washington, either in the riot itself or the march and protests that preceded it. Officials are looking into whether the officers violated any laws or policies or participated in the violence. Associated Press, by way of the American Independent, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. The Environmental Protection Agency announced more than $66 million in grants to 151 communities nationwide to assess and clean up contaminated or abandoned brownfields, which are industrial and commercial properties that contain a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. An estimated 450,000 brownfields, including abandoned industrial facilities, waste disposal sites, and former gas stations, plague cities, towns, and rural areas throughout the country. This is a significant opportunity for environmental justice communities and rural communities that for far too long have been living with blighted pieces of property, and now they can see on the horizon investment opportunities that will come to fruition. EPA Administrator Michael Regan said on Tuesday in an interview. About half the communities targeted for the latest EPA grants are receiving money from the program for the first time, and more than 85% are located in small communities. President Joe Biden rightfully sees this as a significant opportunity, which is why the American Jobs Plan calls for an additional $5 billion investment in brownfields and Superfund sites, Regan said, referring to Biden's $2.3 trillion infrastructure proposal. On other topics, Regan said the administration is working on a plan to replace a clean water rule imposed by the Trump administration, as well as a replacement for former President Barack Obama's plan to address carbon pollution from coal-fired power plants. On another controversy, Regan said EPA has received tremendous interest from scientists and other experts seeking to serve on two advisory boards that Trump gutted soon after taking office. Regan said his March reset of the Science Advisory Board and Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee was needed because Trump administration appointees were overly friendly to business. He pledged his actions would return the EPA to its practice of relying on advice from a balanced group of experts. Marga Acharya of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The U.S. government relaxed a long-standing maritime law protecting domestic shipping commerce to allow an undisclosed company to transport gasoline and diesel to ports in the East Coast after a cyber attack crippled the nation's largest fuel pipeline network. The Jones Act, implemented in 1920, requires goods moved between U.S. ports to be carried by ships built domestically and staffed by U.S. crew. The waiver will allow foreign vessels to ship petroleum products from the Gulf Coast to East Coast ports in the United States. The pipeline network, owned by privately held Colonial Pipeline, was targeted by what the FBI said was a shadowy criminal group out of Russia called Darkside. Colonial, which was forced to shut the line, triggering fuel shortages and panic buying in southeastern United States, said it was slowly restarting the network while adding that it will take several days to return to normal operations. Pump prices rose to a 7-year high as motorists rushed to fill their tanks. Efforts to get fuel supplies to areas in the United States facing shortages have been slowed because ship owners have mothballed U.S.-flagged oil tankers that can make coastal voyages, shipping sources said yesterday, Wednesday. Secretary Mayorkas of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security did not name the company to which the temporary waiver was granted. The approval was given in the interest of national defense, he said, after consulting the Departments of Transportation, Energy, and Defense. Jones Act restrictions are waived sparingly. In 2017, the former administration of Donald Trump waived them to get fuel and supplies to storm-hit Puerto Rico. Separately, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said in a statement that the Biden administration will stay in contact with Colonial Pipeline and offer any assistance to them as needed in the coming days. Psaki urged people not to hoard fuel and only purchase what they need. You know people are going to hoard. I mean, it's the American way, isn't it? All right. Let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your Fast Track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
And I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today we're discussing whether human behavior or virus variants led to India's COVID catastrophe.
And we'll talk about ways to make sense of CDC's new mask guidance and what it means when we're coming out of the caves we've been in for the past year.
The COVID situation in India right now is just devastating, with bodies piling up and shortages of critical supplies like oxygen. The big question is, how did things get so bad? Josh, you've been looking at two possible culprits. What can you tell us?
The first thing I can say is that people want to blame new virus variants as one of those culprits. But they're wrong. Experts say the problem stems from what people, not variants, have done in India. The country has gone from 100 to 200 deaths per day in the first months of this year to a shocking climb in April and May. About 4,000 people are dying of COVID every day now. And as you say, everyone wants to know why this happened. Many seem eager to blame a new variant. The BBC and other media like calling it the double mutant because that sounds scary and it has two mutations. But I'll call it by the last three numbers virologists use to name it, 617. Vaughn Cooper, a microbiologist at the University of Pittsburgh who tracks these viral versions, told me 617 is just not a vicious microbe overrunning the country. For instance, it has less ability to evade antibodies than variants that have become dominant in South Africa and Brazil. And it may not even be widespread in India. Cooper says the country does not track these variants very closely. Ravi Gupta, a microbiologist at the University of Cambridge, did a small test on 617. He put the variant into test tubes with antibodies from 9 people who had one shot of the Pfizer vaccine. The variant's mutations didn't help it. Antibodies nailed it. Gupta's conclusions: vaccinations work, and this viral version isn't particularly awful. And please stop calling it a double mutant, he says. Most of the variants running around the world now have at least 2 mutations. It's a meaningless term.
That's fair, but what about vaccines? Could those help with the surge at all?
Yes, they could. But here's a real problem. India doesn't have a lot of vaccines. Only about 9% of its people have had one shot. In the U.S., that number is 45%. In Israel, it's 60%. What India does have a lot of, starting in March, was unprotected crowds. There were tens of thousands of people going to pilgrimages and on religious holidays, and going to giant political rallies. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party ramped up a campaign with huge events and touted that his government beat the virus. restrictions on gatherings went away. No masks, no physical distancing in a country with a lot of people. Now there are 400,000 new infections every day. The bottom line is that people crowding together drove this disaster. Variants may play some role. Another variant that spread quickly around the UK and in the US is also in India. But people and politicians lit the fire with big gatherings, and apparently by thinking the virus was not a risk. As these sad events unfold, you may want to donate to help people in India. If you're so moved, we've popped a link into the transcript section of our webpage for this episode, and it lists several organizations that are giving medical aid and food. In the U.S., the CDC recently announced some new guidelines for when vaccinated people can ditch their masks. What do the guidelines say, and how should we interpret them?
The new guidelines state that vaccinated people no longer need to wear masks when they're outside exercising, gathering in small groups outside, or dining outside with friends and family. This is welcome news for many of us. We know the risk of COVID transmission is extremely low outdoors, although not zero. That's because the virus is thought to spread mainly through airborne droplets or aerosols, which quickly become diluted outside. It's like a drop of dye in the ocean, as Lindsay Marr, a Virginia Tech aerosol scientist, puts it. The CDC says unvaccinated or partially vaccinated people should still wear masks when they're gathering with friends or family outside their household. And both vaccinated and unvaccinated people should wear them in crowded settings such as sporting events, parades, or live performances.
All these categories are kind of hard to keep track of, though.
Yeah, the CDC doesn't define what counts as a small group of friends and family because it depends on the context. And it's somewhat hard to remember all the different scenarios for when vaccinated and unvaccinated people can gather and who still needs to wear masks. Still, it's a first step toward a return to some kind of normalcy, but it's going to feel weird for a while. Many people who've been vaccinated, including me, are finding it hard to go barefaced and feel like they're being judged for not wearing a mask. Just a few weeks ago, the same people were judging others for the same behavior. And it's not like we're all wearing t-shirts announcing our vaccination status. Eventually, hopefully, enough people will have gotten vaccinated that we can all feel safe letting our masks and our hair down a little. Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly and check out siam.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Heart disease and stroke can be catastrophic. They're leading causes of death, disability, and healthcare spending in the U.S., yet they're largely preventable. Alarmingly, heart disease and stroke are taking a toll on middle-aged adults 35 to 64, with over 800,000 deaths and hospitalizations in 2016. Million Hearts is a national initiative focused on preventing 1 million heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiovascular events by 2022. Coordinated actions by Million Hearts partners in communities, healthcare, and public health will keep people healthy, optimize care, and improve outcomes in populations at risk. Everyone has a part to play. Focus on the ABCs of heart health. A. Aspirin use when appropriate. B. Blood pressure control. C. Cholesterol management. And S. Smoking cessation. To learn more, visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage, because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Is corporate ethics an oxymoron? Do you have to be a jerk to be a successful CEO? Is exploitation the only path to profit? The good news is that many companies, big and small, in the food economy are blazing a different path through Wall Street's jungle of greed, demonstrating that money and morality can be compatible. Texas supermarket chain H-E-B, for example, has drawn an intense loyal customer base by 1. Investing in good wages and benefits for employees, 2. Showing up in such emergencies as pandemics, hurricanes, freezes to give essential supplies and hands-on help, and 3. Being an involved and supportive neighbor to the hundreds of unique communities it serves. Also, Maine Grains is relocalizing the business of milling grain by working with local farmers who had been abandoned by global grain marketers. They're producing flours from heritage grains, boosting the local economy in the process. Then there's Bob's Red Mill, which also mills its products from diverse natural grains, and it's 100% employee-owned. These are part of a rising business alternative to the selfish profiteering ethic of Fortune 500 titans. Called certified B corporations, they definitely exist to make a profit, but they're equally focused on having a positive social impact, prioritizing fair wages, environmental protections, and healthy communities as core elements of their missions, even making those goals legal requirements of their corporate charter. This is Jim Hightower saying Ben & Jerry's and New Belgium Brewery are just a couple more of some 3,800 other businesses now organized as B Corps. Though not pretending to be perfect, they're at least striving to be more than money grubbers, instead trying to contribute to the common good. For more information, go to bcorporation.net. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, now live streaming on Facebook from the Chat and Chew Cafe. So grab a libation, pull up a virtual chair, and join our freewheeling conversations with political mavericks, musical agitators, and kick-ass grassroots groups. The Lowdown Happy Hour will connect you to good trouble activists who are building people power across America. Get the lowdown at hightowerlowdown.org.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1975. That was the day workers at Tolteca Foods in Richmond, California, went out on strike. Many were undocumented Mexican women who helped organize the plant in 1969. In his book, The Revolutionary Imaginations of Greater Mexico, historian Alan Aledo Gomez states that the women had grown increasingly frustrated with the lack of union response regarding speed-ups, immigration raids, discretionary firings, substandard wages and unsafe working conditions, and began to look elsewhere for support. They reached out to the organization CASA, which provided legal and social services for undocumented immigrants. The women decided to strike without authorization from the Contra Costa Labor Council. They packed the council's emergency meeting, where they put their scarred bodies on display to attest to the dangerous and abusive working conditions and poor wages. Just as the council sanctioned the strike, workers learned the company started removing machinery from the factory. They packed the picket lines to stop the trucks from taking out the equipment. The first driver stopped. The second plowed through several women. The strike committee won an injunction to prevent the removal of equipment, and after 3 weeks, workers won their demands. Gomez argues the strike was important for several reasons. It demonstrated that a large female and undocumented workforce could organize and win a strike against a transnational company at a moment when unions were increasingly under attack. They built a rank-and-file independence that built support for their demands from their union leaders and the broader community. The women workers at Tolteca fought for bread and butter issues. They also worked to reshape their union to take on broader issues of social justice that included immigration rights and women's rights.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin, weather from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting to be a bit cooler than yesterday. We're only going to go up to 85. Only. And we'll have abundant sunshine with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Partly cloudy early tonight with increasing clouds overnight. Lows in the low to mid 50s with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Partly cloudy skies tomorrow, looking to get only about 80 degrees. And winds will then be out of the north-northwest, increasing to 10 to 15 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon have increased and now stand at 10,824, and the deceased have increased as well, now stands at 138, and we still have the COVID pandemic denialists on Facebook, in our local pages here in Southern Oregon. And of course, anybody who tries to set the record straight is suspended from the group by the moderators, if not by Facebook itself. Well, it looks like grass pollen is high right outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is good at 30 parts per million, and that daytime UV index has ticked up one notch, now into the very high range at 8. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.11 inches. Visibility is at 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 80%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Well, it looks like London is 52 and cloudy. Paris is 62 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 66 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 57 degrees with light rain. Kabul is 70 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 80 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 63 and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 64 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 48 and cloudy. And New York is 65 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and we all know that as the Weather Underground. Anonymous staff at Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A court in the Russian city of Yekaterinburg jailed its former mayor for 9 days after finding him guilty of using social media to urge people to protest for the release of jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Yevgeny Roizman, who served as mayor of Russia's fourth largest city from 2013 to 2018, was charged with organizing an illegal rally after he urged his nearly 500,000 followers on Twitter to take to the streets. Organizing a protest means one tweet and a retweet, Roizman wrote on Twitter, mocking the ruling. This is what constitutes a call to take to the streets. Roizman, who was also ordered to complete 30 hours of community service, is an outspoken critic of the authorities and sometimes denounces them on Twitter using expletives. Authorities have stepped up their crackdown on opposition activists in the wake of protests calling for the release of Navalny, who was jailed in February on charges he said had been trumped up. Police detained thousands at rallies across Russia in support of Navalny earlier this year, after saying that the demonstrations were illegal and that those taking part could face charges. Roisman, who has described himself as a friend of Navalny, resigned from his post in 2018 after authorities moved to scrap mayoral elections in the city of 1.5 million in the industrial belt of the Ural Mountains.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous staff, this time at the Associated Press, brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Coronavirus cases are exploding in Asia and the Pacific, with over 5.9 million new confirmed infections in just the past 2 weeks, more than all other regions combined, the International Federation of the Red Cross said yesterday, Wednesday. It warned that the surge is pushing hospitals and health systems to the brink of collapse. 7 out of 10 countries globally that are doubling their infection numbers the fastest are in Asia and the Pacific. Laos took just 12 days to see its cases double, and the number of confirmed infections in India has doubled in under 2 months to more than 23 million. Oxford University's Our World in Data reported that more than 5.9 million new COVID-19 infections in Asia and the Pacific during the last 2 weeks. Official figures for much of the region are widely believed to be undercounts. COVID-19 is exploding across much of Asia, overwhelming hospitals and healthcare. More people have been diagnosed with the disease in Asia over the past 2 weeks than in the Americas, Europe, and Africa combined, Red Cross Asia Pacific Director Alexander Matou said. Right now, we need global solidarity for regional support with more medical equipment, support for prevention, and urgent access to vaccines, he said. While vaccination campaigns are underway in the region, the Red Cross said they are hampered by shortages, hesitancy, and the costly logistics of reaching many areas across the region. To bring this pandemic under control, we need greater global cooperation so that life-saving resources, medical equipment, vaccines, and money get where they are needed to help people most at risk. We're only safe when everyone is safe, the Red Cross said. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie d'un novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.